Welcome to the final episode of Season 1 of Edheads. I'm your host, AJ Gutierrez, and today I'm joined by my producer, Michael Palmer. Together, we're going to dive into 5 key takeaways and reflect on our journey together this season. Let's get into it. This is Edheads. Hey, Michael, I'm so excited to be here with you today to recap the amazing journey you and I have been on together for this entire season of Edheads. For the viewers and people who've listened in, I'm just so grateful for you taking time to join us on this exploration of the intersection of AI and then education. And there's so much more to learn. I think that's what's very exciting. Michael, for you, what has this journey been like for you?
Yeah, well, it was great to have you on my podcast. Originally, I had you and Alan, your co-founder from Saga, on Trending in Education. And following up on that, hearing from you that you wanted to do a little more, but you weren't sure what it would be. You were talking about a journey. It turned into a literal journey. It turned into the going to meet the guests where they are, to travel around the country. We've been in California, Chicago, Washington, D.C., you've been to Mexico City. It's really become something more than a typical podcast. The fact that it's in person, that it has the intimacy and the authenticity of a face-to-face feel, that to me really is a differentiator. And that's something that allowed you to go deeper than what I think you would typically get in these types of conversations.
Having the opportunity to connect one-on-one in person with the guests just opened the door to not only just getting a deeper understanding of their expertise, but really getting to know them as humans and the values that's shaping what they do day to day as leaders, as entrepreneurs. And I thought that was really, really special as well. And it has been one heck of a journey. I remember our first episode we kicked off with Armando, who records all the episodes behind the scenes, flew out to California for our first episode with Rajen, and his flight was diverted because of a storm. He ended up going to Los Angeles. He got a car. He drove 6 hours during the night.
Yeah, right.
Show at that hotel, which was amazing. So yeah, it was just right out of the gate. Edheads was on a whole new level of uncharted territory.
Yeah, it reminds me of the idea in learning science of desirable difficulty, productive struggle. Like, in order to learn something, you need to put a little bit of, not too much, but you need to put a little bit of resistance in the system. And traveling around the U.S. and meeting folks, we interviewed Jennie Megiera in her living room because the blizzard hit Chicago the night before we recorded with her. And that was like our first 2 or 3 episodes. So we certainly hit the ground running and started to understand the challenges and opportunities of taking the show on the road. But then the other element that I thought makes this show different is really two aspects, and they're related. One is the concept of co-design, and 2 is always coming back to the audience of the district leader, the school leader, who's in many ways overwhelmed and doesn't really know how to get started. And I feel like those elements were, a higher level through line. And then we'll get into the 5 questions for school leaders to ask Gen AI EdTech companies, because that's an infographic that you and Saga have shared. And I think those themes really fit. But if you were to talk about the audience and what you were trying to accomplish with Edheads when we were starting, can you kind of build on what I was talking about?
So the intent was to help provide information to district leaders as they wrestle with key issues. And the intent wasn't to solve all these challenges, but open the doors to some resources and good people they could potentially reach out to for support, right? At the end of the day, we're all trying to do what's best for students. And so ultimately, that was what I was trying to do. From Saga's perspective, we're an evidence-based organization that we specialize in personalization. And I think for us, central to that is really thinking intentionally about how we're going to use technology to help scale personalization and help improve the effectiveness and efficiency so that educators, so that they can do what matters most, which is building meaningful connections with kids. And I think what's special about Saga in our context of what we do is that spirit of curiosity and desire to keep learning. And everything we do is grounded in solid research. And I think for all educators, we have to have that entrepreneurial spirit to continue to explore and, be willing to be bold and to shake up the status quo. Along the way, a lot of big questions, even internally, we were wondering about ethics. How do you mitigate against biases? I wasn't hearing enough about real talk about how those types of issues really manifest itself in education. We've had a chance to have amazing, crucial conversations about those tough issues with Dee Lanier, right? And I thought that was really, really special. And I haven't heard personally people get that deep on those particular topics when I've attended conferences so far.
I'm a podcaster. I do hundreds of interviews, and I will say, particularly the ones that went deep with Dee Lanier and Tema Monroe-White about bias, I think revealed it with a level of depth and authenticity that I haven't seen elsewhere. Let's run through quickly the 5 top-level questions. So the top-level areas to focus on. The first is human oversight and quality control. The second is mitigating bias in outputs. The third is student privacy and ethical data use. The fourth is evidence of impact. And the fifth is accessibility and inclusive design. We've now done 12 episodes, and I was happy when thinking about what we would talk about today that we've actually done a nice job, I think, hitting on each of those themes.
Yeah, and those are the 5 thematic things that we took away from all these conversations. And when you're starting with human oversight and, quality control, at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is trust, right? And I think central to trust is just one, being very transparent, authentic about the limitations and constraints of technologies. I also think it's important to be honest with your users, your stakeholders, about very proactive steps you're taking to mitigate those things and to learn and try to set up those controls internally and share how you're approaching that. And so I think that came out thematically from our conversation with Kristen Giserbo. That was very clear with our fired up, conversation with Aaron Moat, who was very passionate about that as well. And so I think that's a big deal. And I took a step in that direction in the episode with Mikey. That's the type of transparency we need to have in the education space, right? If we are really going to want to shift mindsets from parents and about their willingness to embrace these types of new emerging technologies. The motivating factor for those controls is mitigating those biases. And that was clear from our conversation with Tema and Dee Lanier. And the challenge with the technologies that we have now, especially when it comes to large language models, LLMs like ChatGPT, is that it is trained on bias technology. And there's a really provocative example Dee shared in the episode when we had a conversation. If you Google unprofessional hair and you look at the images, the listeners, you can think about what kind of images will show up. And that's just a concrete example of, our technologies, these are trained on those types of data sets. And so, what are we going to do to make sure that those data sets have a much more representative information to mitigate those things? And what was really interesting from my conversation with Tema, she, as a data scientist, she was very intentional about creating concrete methodologies to stress test data sets. And I thought that was really intriguing because in our conversation so far with at conferences, people talk about having controls, but what does that really look like? How do you really stress test something? She came up with a methodology and she coined the term emancipatory data science. And she talked about a little bit in that episode about some of the strategies she uses and some of the key findings from that, which to me were really evocative. And I think is a really good example of very practical things folks can do to, again, stress test their data.
Yeah. Well, awareness of the problem is the first step, and I feel like coming in with transparency, I would also say humility. I feel like that was something that I did appreciate about all of these conversations. If you look at, Rajen Sheth, the founder of Kyron Learning, kind of a hotshot in Silicon Valley, and then you actually sit down with him and he is a very humble, authentic human who is engaging with you in an authentic way. Same is true for Jennie Megiera. You mentioned Jennie's from Google Education. Kristen DeSerbo from the Khan Academy. I think all of them are great examples of folks who are in the field. They're building this stuff, but they're coming at it really with the belief in that notion of co-design, in that idea that you don't come at it with all the answers. And I feel like that was very true when you had your team on. In a lot of ways, you were opening folks up to the complexity of the conversation and the fact that it's not an easy space to operate in, especially if you're trying to do so ethically.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm so grateful for all the guests who joined the show. And it's been, particularly that first episode with Rajen, we had this sketchy hotel room that we went to. And I'm surprised when he showed up, he just turn around and walk away. I'm grateful for him, his willingness to roll with it. I just have any recollection of us filming and the door was open and the cleaning crew came in and paused and looked, they see all the cameras and lights and they thought, what the heck is going on here? And it'd be hilarious.
Yeah. And he came back for his Edheads mug. The other topic here, and you mentioned Erin, I thought she did about as good a job as anyone talking about student privacy and ethical data use. That's a lot of what Erin's doing. She used this analogy of hot showers, which has stuck with me, that, we think about the benefits of AI, the benefits of the technology, but we frequently don't think about the pipes that are providing all of that to folks. Thoughts on student privacy and ethical data use?
Well, I think the big takeaway is like, who at the end of the day owns this data too, right? And so I think in addition to privacy, there's a concern about not just the privacy itself, but, getting permission for use of data from students. And I also think that another thematic thing that came from our conversation with Erin is just interoperability. District leaders are just inundated and overwhelmed with all kinds of technologies. And right now, just for a lot of leaders, this hodgepodge of stuff. And there's so many tools and login. Mm-hmm. The procurement process for this is overwhelming. And these technologies are moving really, really quickly. And when you start rolling out tools and resources without a lot of clarity on exactly what you want to do, it could backfire. An example of that was what happened in Los Angeles when they launched that chat-based that chatbot. And I think there was a really good case study of what we don't want to do, which is really starting on the why. What is the problem that we're trying to solve right first for our kids, for our communities? And how can we use these technologies as a means, as a tool to help us accomplish those goals, not just use the tools as a means to an end? And I think that we talked a little bit about that with Erin. And I think Erin shared a lot of really great resources in our episode about different organizations providing tools and guidance around what artificial intelligence is, procurement guidance and tools for district leaders. And so I think that's a really great episode. And Erin's, I think, is a really great resource. Innovate EDU is a great resource to support district leaders as they're wrestling with some of these themes that we're talking about now.
Yeah. And it comes back to that idea of trust too. Like, who can you trust? Because we know on the heels of social media that AI is probably not going to be entirely user-centered. There are a lot of ed tech companies that are potentially predatory out there. And then how do you find trusted guides, your Sherpas up the mountain of ed tech, so that you're actually avoiding the dangers out there, but still realizing the opportunities? And, I'd say EdSafe Alliance, like a lot of the stuff that Erin was talking about, we can include those references. But I also thought the research side was something that really came out throughout, where the folks you worked with, the folks you interviewed had done research. The idea of being evidence-based is important. And that's certainly something that's come out a lot in Saga's work. It came up in your interview with your team. And then we have some shows on the horizon around interviews we did out in Colorado with the team at UC Boulder. But what I came away from this entire season with is, A, it's a lot of hard work to do the rigorous research, but B, it does pay off. And that's another place where folks are trying to figure out who to trust. Look to the folks who have actually worked with research to make sure that what they're doing is making an impact.
I've thought a lot about this, and I think part of the challenge is that some of these emerging tools are so new that there isn't a lot of data. And I really appreciate Kristen DeServo's honesty about that. We're not in the place, she, at least with Kamigo, they're still trying to develop the tool and technology. But I know Kamigo and Kristen, I know her well. She's really committed to having rigorous evaluations, RCT gold standard style evaluations. But there's a lot that has to be done in advance before you get to that stage. And so she's very intentional about that. I think the other challenge as well is that there's a lot of things grading as science. And I think that it's hard to parse out what is rigorously evaluated from, I don't know how many times I hear in the news whether, wine is actually good for me or not. Right. And so I think that's just another example of just for the general population, when you hear evidence-based or a research study, it doesn't have the same kind of weight or caliber. And so I think there's naturally a lot of skepticism around that. So, and I think that's also true for a lot of district leaders. And there's probably have an entire episode on unpacking what is evidence-based really mean, right? And so I think as well, I think it's important to acknowledge that and the fact there's just so much to learn. But just because we don't know about the impact doesn't mean it's not worthwhile to explore. And I think that hopefully from listening, folks are inspired by what the possibilities, but we have to do so. We have to approach it with rigor, with thoughtfulness. And, what we talked about with Dwayne, for example, is doing that in a way that's co-designed, right? And empowering district leaders and giving them the tools and resources to set their own R&D agendas, right? And could we find ways for that innovation to happen locally? Can we find ways to empower teachers to play a role shaping that R&D agenda? And so I think that is really, really exciting because oftentimes the R&D agenda is set at the national level or at the district levels, but it'll be innovative at a much faster rate if we create these innovation hubs and locally. And I thought that was really inspirational. I think it's much easier said than done. We had a chance to unpack that a bit when we had a chance to connect with the CU Boulder team and what they're doing to design with kids and with teachers on AI. And the idea is that there's no one size fits all when it comes to AI. And it goes back to this idea of really listening to the goals of your teachers and your community and making sure that you're creating the tools to help you accomplish the goals that you set for yourself.
Yeah. And I think connected to that is also looking outside the walls of your own school or the boundaries of your own school district. I thought Bob Runcie did a nice job talking about that as well. Chiefs for Change, as someone who really knows what it's like to be a district leader, was talking about looking to the state level, looking at regional level, looking at ways to kind of connect outside of your traditional kind of modes of operating to get new ideas. It reminded me a lot of what I think you got out of the Mexico City trip, which is also in my heart of hearts. I do want Edheads to become the Anthony Bourdain on the road. We'll get more food and drink and entertainment value into it. That aside, it did feel like that episode, I think, was almost modeling for folks how to maybe think more broadly and, look more widely for perspective when trying to move forward with some of this stuff.
To be there in Mexico City was really special, visiting the Anthropology Museum, seeing the history, culture was just so, evocative for me.
There was a hot air balloon ride.
It was a hot air balloon ride over the pyramids, and just for me personally, just kind of feel that ancestry was really, really powerful. And I think that it was an amazing reminder of the fact that there's amazing things happening internationally when it comes to trying to come up with innovative solutions to deal with some of our most pressing social challenges. And in the US, we tend to be on our own bubble when it comes to education and other matters. And so to listen to people from, like Ghana or Ukraine, right? About, or the Philippines, right? And she has to connect with the wife of the mayor of a city in the Philippines. And it was this amazing conversation about some of the challenges they're wrestling with. And there was so much we can learn from that. I remember there was a country that talked about a buyback program for firearms, and they melted down their firearms and made them into tools. So theoretically, you have this tool designed for theoretically killing to tools for creating life or to building, and like shovels or instruments, right?
Yeah.
I thought that was really evocative to hear. And I also thought it was really important and reminder to educators that when we think about accelerating educational equity, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. This is not just an education matter, right? And I think that it requires a thoughtful, integrated approach in partnership with, our medical professionals, right? And you have to think about mental health support. You have to think about housing, and I think for all that responsibility is falling on the shoulders of our educators. And I think that's what's leading to a lot of burnout. I think that's what, and so I think the responsibility of education is a shared responsibility across sectors. And I think that that was a really important aha moment when and take away from my experience in Mexico City. And that's what I really talked about in that episode. I think there's a lot of things we could start to unpack thematically and the next season of Edheads on scale. And without question, technology probably will continue to be part of that conversation as well.
Yeah. And there is that contrast or that tension, I guess, between speed, where this technology is moving so fast, and then the rigor and the research apparatus necessary to make sure what you're actually implementing is making a difference. And that's one that I think when you get into scale, that's another sort of central question there, where how do you keep up with this increasing rate of change while at the same time doing so in a way that's rigorous and thoughtful and measured?
Yeah, I mean, I think from an operational perspective, from a nonprofit lens, how do you go from mid-size to large size, right? There's lots to unpack there, what you have to do. And first-hand experience with exactly that at Saga, to make lots of mistakes along the way. And my team is not afraid to let me know it. And the other thing is thinking about what are the shifts in policy that we have to make at the state or federal level to bring the conditions to support evidence-based programs. What are the types of incentives to inspire district leaders and or others, if it's a different sector, to shake up the status quo, which sometimes is a really challenging thing to do. And so those are the thematic things I would love to explore. I'm eager to explore in the next episode. And there's a broad range of people we can talk to about that. So I think that's what's up next for us. And maybe one day we can have that on the road, Anthony Bourdain vision. But that was that Mexico City episode was challenging. I recorded that whole thing on my phone. And I didn't have the team with me. I didn't have Mike or Rob Adams, who's the director of brand at Saga, supporting, and Armando, who did all our filming. I'm so grateful to you, Mike, Rob, and Armando for being part of this journey, and looking forward to what's next for Edheads. And again, so grateful for everyone who's tuned in. And if folks are curious about connecting with anyone we've had chances to talk to, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to do our best to make those introductions. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, AJ.
What are you most optimistic about in the future when it comes to AI? Every student should be able to learn any subject from the teacher that's right for them.
Reimagining the learning ecosystem. So what do you all mean by that?
High impact tutoring is really about the human relationship with tutoring.
We need to create this innovation in learning apparatus the way that we see in other sectors.
Every other sector has made this fundamental investment in being a learning sector and a learning system. And we have not made that investment in education. And if people aren't angry about that, I don't think there's anything else they should be angry about right now.
What do you think is the ideal use of AI in education? What does that really look like?
You have to focus a lot on the underlying systems and structures and processes. And you need to think about what opportunities does AI give you that you didn't have before to go and make those kind of changes to improve what you're already doing.
What are the steps that districts can take to ensure that they maintain control over the intellectual property or safeguard student data while they're accessing these types of technologies?
I think they need to be really aware, right? I mean, Google gives lots of its services away for free because they're mining the data. And yes, now finally that's outlawed from an educational standpoint. But as soon as those students graduate, it's not. And we just train them to do specific things and use specific things. And of course, we could talk for hours about, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and, pick your thing.
So is the concern about cheating a mistake? Like, how should education leaders think about it?
So it's this exclusive ways in which that we've done things and we continue to do things that then AI becomes a part of the conversation and then says, oh, what? We don't want AI to disrupt the system and how we have it in current play. And we say, wait, there's actually bigger questions that should be asking, and this is disturbing things. We don't have a problem with that aspect of it.
Emancipatory data science is about using quantitative and computational approaches and giving power and ownership to the people who are the most likely to be harmed, unfortunately, through these biased tools and algorithms.
The students who need us most are not out there actively looking for help. They're giving up or not trying or working through. And we realized we needed to be in classrooms where we could be thinking about being part of the whole learning experience.
The power, the amplification of all of these incredible ideas that can inspire, and we can replicate the things that are working and also learn about the things that didn't work.
You'd be surprised at how much we have in common across geography in terms of what cities are wrestling with.
Part of government's responsibility is to create easy and user-friendly ways for the citizens and the public to interact with city services.
We have the opportunity with AI to find a way for school to empower schools and districts to make this part of the fabric of school design. We're looking at how do we curate all of the technologies and innovation, old and new, to do things that we've always wanted to do that we couldn't do before at scale.
Follow us for meaningful AI conversations right here on Edheads.